On August 11th, 2017, the world was introduced to the first trailer for Anno 1800, and we all jumped for joy at what we saw, or at least I know I did. To quote one of the earliest dev blogs, so with Anno 1800, the series not only returns to its historical roots, but also delivers the full Anno package on day one, including many of the features that longtime fans missed in Anno 2205, such as sandbox mode, physical goods, classic Anno multiplayer, randomly generated maps, trade routes, and a military fully integrated into the main game. Third-party AI, an in-depth diplomacy and trading system, will allow you to engage characters as allies, enemies, or partners while competing over different islands and trade routes together on one big map. So it was an exciting announcement for sure, and no one, not even Ubisoft Minds, at the time still Blue Byte, had any idea of the international success that Anno 1800 would have. So today I really want to take a look back at the development, the release, and updates to the game since the game came out in April of 2019. We're going to look at some of the highs and lows and everything in between that made this game such a gem in the gaming community. So sit back, grab a cup of hibiscus tea as we take a look back at Anno 1800. The early dev blogs for Anno 1800 are actually really fascinating to read. There was a lot of early development features and mechanics that were either not completely implemented at all, changed from the original vision, or in some cases kind of outright false advertising. I'll explain the last one a little bit later on, so put away the pitchforks and stop furiously typing a comment to me. But did you know, for example, that the early vision for Anno did not include the need to go to the New World to set up new production chains that your old world population needs to advance? So according to the Multisession gameplay blog, players are going to be able to stay in one session entirely and never have the need to go to another season for other goods that they didn't want to. The players who prefer the "my home is my castle" approach would be able to trade for goods that they needed. Wait a second, this kind of sounds like Docklands, doesn't it? Huh, interesting how that works out. They also planned on limiting the multiplayer experience to a single large session of 2 to 4 players. You know, for the 20 of you guys out there that actually do multiplayer. I'm kidding, sort of. The Art of War blog detailed how you were going to be able to essentially vassalize opponents' islands. You'd be able to conquer an enemy island and have them pay you in the form of taxes and even goods. This of course evolved into the system we have now of owning all the shares on an island, but AI will just buy the shares back and you have to buy them back from the AI, back and forth, and you could still possibly be at war with the island itself. Honestly, I think the original idea sounded a little more interesting, and I honestly would have liked to have seen something like that instead of the share system we have now, which I'm not a fan of. And I think it would have been a lot different, and maybe a little more interesting. But we'll talk about shares a little bit later. One blog that I reference often, usually as a point of criticism, is the one called Construction AI. This was the blog detailing how AI opponents you would be playing against are programmed to play, or were supposed to be programmed to play. The AI was supposed to largely play by the same rules as the player, and would have to manage resources, generate taxes to fund a fleet and more production buildings, fulfill needs, and really everything that we as the player have to think about as well. Now, unfortunately, this is where the developers just kinda tossed in the towel and never mentioned this again. We know from both experience and from players who tore apart the data packs the game is coded in to learn their secrets that the AI just cheats. It doesn't care about taxes, influence, population, resource management, or anything else. It is simply scripted to build X and Y and pump out more ships than is truly possible given their current level of progression. And this is really my first big critique and where I think some of that false advertising comes in. The developers, before release, were very, very vocal about changes to plans on features for the game or things the community was asking about, such as land combat. But this is one thing, even if you think it is minor, that was something they basically just swept under the rug and never made any correction on. For me, this is kind of like a compounding issue. It shows that they really couldn't program the AI they wanted. They put the cart before the horse, basically, when they wrote that blog. That in turn tells me that their systems for Anno 1800 were likely too complex to begin with for the AI to properly function. And yes, this game is both easy and complex at the same time for a lot of players, so it's really unfortunate that this is something that they couldn't achieve. Most people play against AI opponents in their game, and as someone who has been around for a long time, I see many newer and inexperienced players trying to base their current progression against the AI, which is impossible. The AI cheats. You can't, or, well, you shouldn't, shame on you, be cheating like the AI does. It would have been great to have AI that actually played the same game you did, and you could actually do things like blockade them or something. I know some people claim to have blockaded, but we know from the game's coding that the AI will eventually just give itself whatever it needs to advance. So it takes away player agency, and that is always a loss for us as the player. But ultimately, even with some of the head-scratching development decisions and almost 2 years of waiting, Anno 1800 finally did release to us in April 2019, and we all got ready to hop into the game and start building our first cities. The core of any Anno game is the production buildings and production chains. This basic premise has been around since 1998 with the original Anno 1602, and hasn't changed in concept much at all over the years. You have a series of raw resources that get either directly turned into end products, or get turned into intermediate products that are combined with other things to be turned into those end products. These goods are either used as construction material for building ships or other buildings, used as consumer goods, or even luxury goods that can raise happiness and give more money. Anno 1800 is no exception and gave us a huge variety of old favorites such as fisheries, which, by the way, fun fact, fisheries almost didn't make it into the game, and the first food for farmers was actually sausages. A test group in development was like, hey, where's the fish? Where's the fish? We always have fish. Anno always starts with fish. Don't know why, but it does. So they gave us our fish back thanks to that test group. But you also get more advanced and complicated chains later on, such as steam carriages and steam motors, sewing machines, and so on. I always felt the variety and progression of production chains was really well done, actually. Starting with basic things like fish and wool clothing for your farmers, and then progressing to more advanced goods such as bakery, and then on to canned food, rum, spectacles, and so on. The visual and mechanical progress of your city through the phases of the Industrial Revolution was really spot on. 1800 also expanded on features in previous games in the series by utilizing mechanics such as electricity as a requirement for more advanced factories, and it allowed it to boost older productions to give us more flexibility in how we produce our goods. However, they did leave behind some mechanics that I thought would have been great to carry on. Do you remember how factories in Anno 2205 worked? You had a main factory building, and you could expand the production output of it by placing down modules. One factory with multiple wings to create a larger factory, instead of having to build just the same factory over and over again. It would increase the workforce. Yes, actually workforce was a thing in 2205 as well, but allowed you to not have to build the same factory all the time. It also gave you some freedom in design. You could lay out the different wings of those factories in any way you wanted to fit in with the city and come up with some really neat looking industrial areas for your futuristic cities in 2205. I really liked that aspect of it, and I was really disappointed to not see it be brought back over. Overall, though, I think most people would agree that the production chains that were introduced with 1800's launch were well implemented and interesting, though. The return to the original Anno gameplay with actual trade routes and ships was also very welcome, but at the same time, 1800 at launch was a bit of a nightmare to manage. We did not have the statistics screen, which basically everyone lives by now, at launch. Oh, the humanity! It did not come out until December of 2019 with patch 6.0. So we had to wait a very, very long time to get that statistics screen so we could actually see and manage all of our islands and all of our productions together and everything. For those first 8 months or so, we had to use the homemade third-party calculators that may or may not have been entirely accurate to try to keep everything in order. Trust me, it was really a dark time of the game trying to manage everything. We were just in the dark on how everything worked together. 1800 was a monstrosity of the game with so many varying factors that could affect your production and consumption, taxes, happiness, and so on. Trying to keep track of it all was a massive headache. People were legitimately using stopwatches to time ships delivering goods, but then forgetting things like cargo slowdown, wind direction, placement of piers, backup piers, everything like that. So the stopwatch thing sometimes didn't even work, and things were a mess. So no wonder they didn't follow through on the AI playing like the player. The CPUs would have been eaten up by the AI trying to manage everything and trying to take up all those calculations. Speaking of CPU munching, that is a small little segue into something else they changed with 1800. Multi-session gameplay was introduced in 2205, with the numerous regions that you would load and unload in and out of. You would build on a region and then you would go back out to the main map, and then you could choose another region, but you actually loaded into it. The region you exited was saved as a snapshot of what was going on when you left, frozen in time basically. 1800 changed this to active regions regardless of which region you were focused on. But I know why they did it. The return to traditional trade routes in physical ships necessitated it, along with things like real-time tax revenues. The game needed to be able to track real-time ship journeys and everything that could affect them. It also forces the player to keep an eye on each region simultaneously so they don't run out of goods because of poor planning or something. The problem with that, all of that is very CPU intensive. It's pretty well known that the longer you play, the bigger your population, the slower the game gets. The game is trying to calculate all of the production chains, warehouse depositing, city incidents, ships sailing around, literally everything in multiple regions all at once. It's pretty massive, and it really eats into your computing power. Now, while I'm sure the next Anno will still have this real-time multi-session feature, I do hope they find a better way to allocate the resources and how things are managed on the back end. 1800 does get kind of laggy in the super late game with a few million people. And since we're mentioning people, let's talk real quick about the residents of our little Anno empire. I have to say, I really think they hit the nail on the head with all the characters in the game. From the citizens in our cities to the quirky and absolutely lovable Sir Archibald Blake, Ubisoft did a really great job of bringing the world to life. Later additions to the game, such as Emperor Katima and even everyone's favorite Donnie and his obsession with his tower, continued this trend of awesome character personalities. Well, except maybe Lady Jane Faithful. Something about her voice lines, and it just makes my skin crawl. I can't stand her. I'm always happy to be done with her questline and get her removed from my eardrums. I also love the look of the buildings for each residential tier. You really get that sense of advancement going from a small village of farmer huts to a grand city of Parisian-style homes all crammed together in shining white and green roof glory. With smoke from factories billowing over the tops of the houses and harbors busy with ships coming and going, they really capture the look and feel of the late 1800s. So let's move on from all the gushing over what I love and on to an area of the game that I feel was a little more flat and actually kind of overdone. And that's items and specialists. Now don't yell at me. I think items and specialists are terrific, and I've loved them since they were introduced back in 1404 in their first iteration. 2070 and 2205 had their own interesting versions of this feature, and 1800 reinvented the wheel again. However, in doing so, I think they went wild for no reason. There are well over 1,000 items and specialists in the game. Over 1,000. Now, how many are really useful? I would say maybe less than 200 or so. The vast majority of items are rather worthless that you might use for all of 10 minutes or really not even use at all. I know what they were trying to go for, item progression, but this really wasn't necessary. Sure, you might use that tanner specialist on your fur dealer for a 10% boost in production, but what is 10%? Not really a lot. You could increase working conditions and take a -1 happiness penalty and save that trade union slot for something more useful like the costume designer or master craftsman Frank, plus some other better items. There is such a thing as too much of something, and we have way too many useless items. Just think about it though. How often do you use common and uncommon items overall? I know I barely do. Small exceptions like the baker in the early game, so I don't need a windmill maybe, but eventually I have so much workforce and income that I don't care and he gets tossed out. It adds unnecessary bloat, and we can play the game just as well without all of those extra items and it won't change the outcome. They also went crazy with too much extra production. Now I'm going to get dragged for this one, but Bruno Ironbright should never have existed in his current form. Advanced weapons and steam motors from a sewing machine factory? I mean, come on now. I know this is a game in a fictional universe, but at least be reasonable with it. Extra products from a specialist should have been relegated to only giving +1 of whatever that particular factory is producing every X cycles, or even give back resources used in productions. Say the sewing machine say that sewing machine factory, for example, +1 steel every 10 cycles or something. It would give you the idea that better processes were implemented, meaning less wasted materials in construction. Not, hey, I got some leftover steel from the sewing machine, so I built a bunch of Gatling guns. Seriously. So, while I think the items and specialists were a great feature to bring back, I feel it wasn't done in a way that really made sense in a lot of ways, and opened up to the game to a lot of really cheesy tactics later on. Now, items for the cultural buildings, your zoos and museums, and then the botanical garden DLC, I think those were actually fine. I can see usefulness for just about every single set that there is. Now, the non-set items, I don't understand the point of. Why would I take up space in a zoo or museum or spend the influence for an item that's going to give me maybe 20 attractiveness? Why would I do that? So I don't really understand the point of the one-off non-set items. I think they could have been not included. I don't think they were that useful at all. I rarely ever use non-set items. You know, cultural buildings cost influence to place, so I want to use that influence for items that are going to give me something back, and that being part of a set that's going to give me some bonus. So while I think all of these set items were really well done and I really like them all, the non-set items, again, kind of goes back to what's the point of them? We would have been fine without it. Didn't need that stuff. It's just extra stuff. Now, Anno 1800 was also the first game where they introduced the idea with like trade unions and town halls and stuff. In previous games, you actually had the items, they would affect the entire island that they were slotted into the trading post for. So this was the first time we actually got local effects for items instead of them being island-wide. I'm on the fence about this. I like the idea of what it did. It allowed people to create their own little pockets of industry built around a trade union, or their own pockets of housing built around a town hall, and they could specialize those pockets instead of specializing the entire island. I think it was a really cool system. I actually love it. I could not see myself playing without that kind of system again, so I do hope the next game in the series still includes this. My only little complaint about it was a bit of oversight in the development of the system, which brought us what we all call clipping. Now, clipping, if you're not familiar with it, is having a building that has even numbers of tiles on each side being able to be affected by 2 trade unions overlapping, and the edge of each trade union radius touches in the center point of the building. This allows the building to be affected by 2 trade unions, and you can stack multiple items. So one building can be affected by up to 6 or 8 items, depending on if you have the Seat of Power DLC and you're using the policy in the Department of Labor to give 4 slots to your trade unions instead of the regular 3. Now, clipping, we know, was a happy accident. They did not mean for clipping to occur, but by the time it was discovered and really made its way around the community, they decided not to fix it because it's not really hurting anything, but it also kind of broke the game. Clipping is really the only reason that you see those super efficient min-max players with like 20 million population. If it was not for clipping, they would not be able to have those kind of population numbers. Now, one argument I see from that community is, well, we have to have clipping or we can't have these populations. And I think that's a cyclical argument. If you never had clipping to begin with, then you might be able to have a max of maybe 10 million population, and you would never think twice about it. Like, oh, well, there's the max based on game mechanics. Well, now your theoretical max in your head is like 21 million or whatever it is now, but it's only possible because of a game-breaking glitch that allowed you to do that. So technically, by what should have been the standard game mechanics, the 20 million population was out of reach anyways. You're only able to do that because you are using a broken system. Now, yeah, it's kind of a whatever. But at the same time, I really wish that they would have fixed stuff like that. There was actually a bug a long time ago where you could put max resident increase items in a town hall and have it on a resident. And using that max resident item, you could push. This was before lifestyle needs, by the way. Let me say that real quick. This was before lifestyle needs was introduced with Empire of the Skies. Because with the lifestyle needs, you can push it past the regular max limit. But anyways, the max resident items would allow you to push your houses past their normal maximum pretty quickly. So if you put a max resident item on a farmer house and you meet the requirements for getting those max residents, then you could upgrade the farmer house or whatever house without fulfilling all the needs. I did this trick quite a few times in different series of mine where I would use those items. That way I didn't have to supply various needs to my people. I would just get them up over the maximum number and upgrade them. Well, they fixed that. They said that that was unintended gameplay, and I do remember a statement from the developers when it was fixed that they don't want broken mechanics like that bypass gameplay or allow you to get around regular gameplay. So I understood why they fixed it, but at the same time, it's like, okay, you're going to fix that, but you're not going to fix clipping, which technically completely breaks the game and allows for very unintended gameplay like that with the clipping. So, you know, it's one of those things where they said this was broken, it must be fixed, but this is broken and we're not going to fix it. You know, it's kind of one of those, and I don't understand it. So really, with items and specialists, I felt like the system was decent, but I do think they went too far with it. Now, we do know from a statement from the developers and stuff a couple of years ago that they are really looking at the items and specialists and how it was received. And we can see that in the latest DLCs and everything we've gotten, where specialists aren't super overpowered anymore. And a lot of times they might actually come with a negative on there. They might not be as perfect as you would want them to be. They have some really good positives, but they might have a small negative attached to it as well. So it seems like over the years they have kind of refined how they want specialists to be, and I hope that that kind of refined idea of how to handle them carries on into future games. So, you know, I actually kind of want to move real quick over to combat. Combat was not a big focus of Anno 1800, I feel. Obviously, they took out land combat. From the combat and military dev blogs that we had, we know that land combat was, you know, they toyed around with the idea on their end and kind of played around with the idea of land combat, but they decided ultimately to shift away from land combat and focus only on the naval combat. They completely had their reasoning for it, and I agree with their reasoning for it. You know, trying to make the game and the buildings and everything else work, and with the scope and scale of how Anno 1800 is compared to the previous games, it just made a lot more sense not to have to deal with, you know, land combat stuff and units and everything else. I totally agree with their reasoning for it. But overall, the combat is kind of bland to me. I'm not really a fan of it. It's very rock, paper, scissors until you throw in the items, and then items kind of make it go all over the place. And I was just never a fan of the combat in any Anno game. When I play a city builder or a resource management game, that's what I want to do. I want to focus on that. If I want to go play a combat game, I'll go play StarCraft again or Age of Empires or something. I just really didn't enjoy it in this game. Part of that is because of how the AI, you know, cheats and everything. You know, you can't really compete hardly with the AI sometimes when it comes to the number of ships. So you just have to get better ships with better items on them, because the AI is just going to have, you know, fleets and fleets of battle cruisers flying around. And their harbors and stuff are completely stacked with about 5 million cannons and everything. It's just silly, and I never really liked it or cared about it. The ship designs were pretty cool. I didn't really like the battle cruisers and the monitors. I don't know, they just didn't really fit. I'm a sail guy myself. I love sailing ships. The battle cruiser, it was too futuristic looking to me. It just didn't work for me. I don't know. I know some people love the battles and they love the battleships and the monitors and they love the combat. And that's fine if you do. I'm not saying that you shouldn't. But I just really feel like the combat was really took a back seat in this game, and they just kind of threw a few things at it and let it be. The only combat related updates we ever saw for the game was in Empire of the Skies when they added the combat airships, the flak cannons, the flak monitors, the blue flame, the flame monitors and stuff like that, and the flame towers. That's the only combat updates we've ever seen for Anno 1800 was all of that in Empire of the Skies, and it's kind of a it was stuff that served the flamethrower stuff was honestly one of those that it was like, why did they even add this? This was not necessary whatsoever. It was just something that someone was like, hey, this would be cool, and threw it in. So the combat stuff definitely gets a D minus for me on the grading scale. It was not that great. I feel like it could have been a little more interesting, possibly, and maybe I would have been more into it. But I just really wasn't. I just really wasn't big into the combat. So while I'm on a little bit of a slightly negative train here, let me just go ahead and get this one out of the way too. Something else that I think Ubisoft Minds sort of dropped the ball on, although it wasn't, as impactful overall on the game itself. And that's the updates and fixes to the game. Now, most games get regular hotfixes and patches pushed out to introduce new features and fix bugs in the games. Ubisoft didn't really do this with Anno. Now, we would get a major patch for a DLC release, and then maybe one more hotfix or minor update patch 1 to 3 months after the DLC released. And then nothing else would come out until the next DLC. This would leave a lot of bugs, broken code, and stuff like that in the game for quite a long time, and it would just create a lot of issues for players. Even then, patches were notorious for fixing bugs, but creating a lot of new ones sometimes, and even somehow bringing back old bugs that had already been fixed, but then they reintroduced them. I don't understand how that happens, but it did quite a few times. It was obvious to a lot of us that the patch Q&A was really lacking, and Anno did struggle with keeping the game patched up and working sometimes. But overall, though, it was a stable and playable game, mostly. It had its problems, but it was stable and playable for the most part. One of the biggest issues that they actually never resolved, and still to this day is a problem, is the DirectX 12 crashing. Now, for those of you who are not aware of this, DirectX 12 in Anno 1800 is really unstable, and it is one of the biggest culprits for crashes in the game. The only suggestion that has ever been given by the developers is switch back to DirectX 11. That's basically it. They never figured out how to fix the problem, and they really just kind of gave up on it. They washed their hands of the DirectX 12 problem and just said, hey, if it doesn't work, go to 11. And that's it. They never tried to figure out what was causing it. There were some bugs and issues with the game that players reported and gave really clear examples to them. They were met with, we don't have that issue on our end, and ignored. And that's really, it's kind of disheartening as a player who's trying to help report bugs and everything to the developers to be hit with the, we don't have this issue, must be something on your end, thanks for telling us. And that's it. You don't ever hear anything else about it. And some bugs, are just not even acknowledged at all. A prime example of this being the train AI glitching out sometimes and not delivering oil to power plants, and it breaks down the entire power plant system. The devs won't make any comments on it, even though myself and many others have shown the issue to them and sent them, save files and everything else showing the problem, and it's just literally ignored. So, while there have been a lot of really awesome quality of life updates to the game over 4 years, there have been so many. Definitely far more positives than negatives on this, but obviously the positives are something that, we're good about. It's all fine. The statistics screen when it came in, the co-op update, the night and day stuff, all of that was really awesome quality of life stuff, really cool new features added to the game. We were really happy about it. But knowing that there's a fairly large plethora of issues that are still existing in the game that probably won't ever get fixed is just kind of a downer, There's things like quests where you might need to escort a ship or deliver items to a ship, and the ship doesn't exist. You'll see like a little gray square on the quest log sometimes, where normally it would have a picture of like a ship or something right there, a little icon of a ship. Sometimes it's just a gray square, and it means the quest has bugged out. It won't work. You have to abandon it. There's no way to get that fixed. There is currently a bug in the game for those of you who have Empire of the Skies or the New World Rising, where Archie and Isabel will no longer sell bauxite and aluminum profiles once you hit the end game stage of the game. That is 1,000 investors and 25,000 global population. They'll stop selling that stuff. So there's still quite a few things like that that have never been addressed. And unfortunately, as of January 5th of this year, we were basically told it will never get fixed. What I mean by that is there is or was a Trello board that was used to track bugs for the game. And, we would have known issues being worked on, blah, 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 blah. Well, all of the bugs that were listed under investigation have all been moved to will not address. And that is it. They have basically wiped their hands of bug fixing on Anno 1800, aside from only critical or game-breaking bugs. That is stated on the Trello board. The only things that they will update now for Anno 1800 are things they consider critical or game-breaking. And currently on the Trello board is still up, even though it said it would be down as of like January 31st, 2024. It's still there, but they have moved all bugs to will not address. So basically everything that is happening with the game as of today that is not working, they're not going to address. They'll only address something new that might crop up, but I don't see it happening. So yeah, I just don't really look for any more real bug fixes to come to Anno 1800 anymore. Only minor updates to account for the new cosmetic DLCs coming this year, and that's going to be it. So it's kind of sad that there are quite a few big bugs and stuff in the game that the developers are not going to address anymore, and some of them have been around for several years without ever being addressed. And that's I do have to give that a thumbs down to the developers on that one. I wish they would have spent some more time trying to fix bugs and do better quality control on bug patches and everything else like that, so we didn't have a lot of the problems that we did. All right, so let's move away from all of that sort of negativity stuff right there and everything else, and let's talk just about the game in general. I've talked about my thoughts on the big game mechanics and features of the game, the patches and how the game was patched over the years and how well it did with that. So let's just talk about the game and its longevity kind of point of view. I mean, obviously the game held its own with 12 DLCs over 4 years of content updates. The last figure we were given in 2023 pointed to about 3 million copies sold, which is really good for an Anno game, although it obviously is a huge far cry from most other city building type games. 3 million copies is, in the big scheme of it all, a very small and what most companies consider underperforming, although Ubisoft Minds obviously was very happy to have sold 3 million copies of the game because they've never sold that many before. So it did really well for what it was. Now, I think a big part of the reason it did so well was a return to the standard Anno formula coming off of 2205, which did very, very poorly. Things like randomized maps and the sandbox mode that was missing from 2205, and it's been a staple of the game for 20 years. Having that back brought back in a lot of veteran players, and the better marketing that Anno 1800 was given helped bring in a lot of new players. I mean, that being said, though, I think they did a weird kind of pivot in a way by creating a semi-static gameplay loop when they introduced Cape Trelawney in Sunken Treasures. You go from a game that has two regions that are somewhat randomized with different map types and a various selection of islands that could be filled in on the layout of the maps and everything. So you always had, okay, I'm starting on this island. So this starting island is different from the last starting island I have, and I've got to think about this and that and all these other things you have to think about, to where now here's a new region with a fixed layout of islands and a new continental island with 3 times the building space of a standard large island. Yes, it's a builder's wet dream with all that space. But the space is the same every time you play. No matter how many times you play the game, Crown Falls is always the same. It removed a lot of the variety and replaces it with this static island you will pretty much always build your biggest city on, unless you're a min-max player, and then you put all of your industry there. So, whatever. I mean, sure, you can build your city in a different way every single time, but it's always going to have the same elevations and the same borders to it. It starts cutting into replayability for me personally, and going by a lot of comments I had on a video I did called Do You Have Crown Falls Syndrome, it seems I'm not alone in that. Random maps are the bread and butter of an Anno game, and having a region that is the de facto best region to build in for a big city with a static, never-changing island takes away from that creativity and that randomness that I always loved. Now, I mean, what if we take Crown Falls out of the equation here? Does the game have a great replayability with plenty of randomness? Kind of. The different map types, once you play them all enough, are predictable because you know the exact layout of the islands are going to be. You know that if you're playing a corners map, you're going to have your 4 starting islands in the center of the map, and all 4 players are going to start on that. If you're playing with other people or other AI, around that, it's going to be a selection of medium and small islands with 4 more large islands on the outskirts. The pirates are going to be in one of 2 corners. And then the other 3 neutral AI are going to be scattered around somewhere, taking up the space of a small island. And that's basically going to be it. If you're playing the Island Arc map, you know that the pirates are always going to be down in the lower left-hand corner, and all of the islands are going to be in a crescent moon shape on the other side of the map, with the 4 starting islands going in a crescent moon shape, starting from the north going to the south. So, you always know how the maps are going to look for the most part with the layout. It's just going to be what islands the map generates for you based on your seed. The islands themselves have been handcrafted by the developers, so it's not procedural, and you know what the islands are going to look like eventually. You play enough, you know what all the islands look like, and you know which ones you want to go for. Then the gameplay loop kind of becomes a factor in this. How many times can you build the same stuff until you're bored? Anno doesn't have like random events or anything that might make you change strategies halfway through your gameplay. Once you have a stable economy, hit investors, you've got stuff built, you've basically won the game. All you're doing from there is seeing how far you can stretch it all until you get bored. And that is the #1 reason people stop and restart: boredom. You can only play so far until you're bored with that particular playthrough, and you start over to do it all over again with maybe a few changes here and there. But there is nothing wrong with that. Restarting any game is usually the most fun, before you're completely overpowered and you have everything and nothing is a challenge anymore. You have to build everything back up, and that can be a satisfying and exciting little adventure again. Can it hold your interest indefinitely? Sure, some people it can, and to those people I say more power to you. I'm glad that it does. For me though, not so much. I do get bored eventually and look for something else to draw my attention. I need something new and exciting. I do wish Anno had those random events that could happen, or something that would cause me to have to change up strategies mid-game. Maybe droughts happen and all my crops fail in a region for a certain amount of time, and I need to figure out how to manage and deal with it. I would love to have seen a more in-depth economy on the world stage where prices for goods could change like the market did in 2205. If you think back to 2205, as you and other players, now of course it was online, so players affected the market of goods. As you sold and bought stuff from the world market, prices for stuff would fluctuate. If someone was selling a massive amount of luxury food or something, the price for luxury food to be sold off would drop drastically to where now it's a net negative trying to sell that stuff and produce it. You're not going to make enough back. It was a dynamic market system. And even though Anno 1800 is not online always like that, where other players are affecting your game, they could have had a randomized algorithm that would randomly assign different prices and fluctuations and stuff, like a stock market almost, and then also be directly affected by whatever you're selling. I mean, it would honestly change up things like the pocket watch trade to Katima. That is a solid, easy trade that you can do, buying pocket watches from Archie, selling them to Katima. Those prices never change, and you're always going to make a ton of money off of it. Now imagine if you had a dynamic system where the more pocket watches you bought, the higher the price would go because you're constantly buying those, and the more you sell them, the lower the price would go. So it would change that amount and stuff and kind of keep it fluctuating. You actually have to change up what you're buying and selling over time to make up for a dynamic market, and I think that would have been kind of interesting. It was always really interesting in 2205 watching what was, really, really valuable right now, and I might, sell off a big stock of that to bring in a big chunk of money. Or I see that the stock price for, something has dropped, so I might hoard a bit of that. I might keep a bunch of that on hand and watch for that price to go back up and then sell it all off. I know that doesn't interest a lot of people, but, stuff like that kind of makes it a little more interesting at times. And, honestly, I also miss disasters. Those added so much interesting randomness to the game. Volcano erupting or a tornado coming through, tidal wave or something, just some sort of random event that you have no control over that you have to deal with. So I do wish there was some more random events going on in the game to kind of keep me on my toes and everything. And so the gameplay doesn't just become a series of, okay, copy paste the same layouts over and over again and just keep filling in space because that's all I have left to do. I mean, so I really would give Anno a passable grade on replayability, and it really comes down to the player. Some people can repeat the motions in a game like this and never get tired, but I know many people who need more reactive gameplay and sometimes unpredictable gameplay to keep them going. Now, of course, there is one thing that did keep many people going, and that was the mini content updates and new mechanics introduced in Season Passes. Now, I'm not going to go into huge detail here about the various DLCs for Anno 1800. I recently did a tier list ranking for each of the 12 DLC updates for the game that I think it really just covers all of my thoughts on them. What I do want to talk about, though, is how the DLCs were implemented on top of the existing gameplay. This was a bit of a hit and miss to me. Some DLC paired nicely with the existing gameplay mechanics and gave us creative new ways to play the game. A good example of that would be Bright Harvest. It felt natural to the progression of the game, and it gave us new ways of managing our farms, and it really became a fan favorite DLC. But then we had things like Docklands, which on the surface was a really cool idea, but it was basically a built-in cheat because of overpowered specialists that could be used to essentially ignore 99% of the game, and just import everything by making advanced weapons from a bicycle factory. Now, obviously, you don't have to use Docklands that way. I know many people just use Docklands for storage, and that's fine, but the fact that they implemented this new mechanic into the game the way they did kind of was a downside to me because I don't think they thought it through. Unlike games like Stellaris, for example, where they have a custodian team that actively works on updating the game to take into account new ideas on mechanics, how DLC content is going to interact with the base game and ensure that there's no crazy interactions or anything like that, and that the DLC content does not obsolete base game features and it keeps it refreshing and interesting. Anno just slapped DLC on top of everything and each other. Have the Research Institute? Great. Now you can just ignore all the mechanics to get specialists like attractiveness on islands with a public mooring, expeditions, and so on. Legendary specialists became a printable currency and no longer game-changing items that you might scream a little too loud when you finally got one. Or was that just me? Again, I don't want to go into a full discussion on all this, so be sure to check out that tier list video below. Most people did agree, though, that Anno 1800 started getting a little bloated around Season 3. By that point, we had 6 regions to juggle, many tiers of populations, and I honestly think we had more resources to manage than every other Anno game put together. It was just becoming a mountain of stuff, is the best word I can describe it. It just became more stuff. I really wasn't super happy about a Season 4, but at least it was okay. Minus Empire of the Skies, which was and is still hot garbage in my opinion. I was just very glad when they announced the end of content development and that they were, moving on to a new project. All in all, I think Anno 1800 really was a good game. It has its faults, and yes, I might have sounded like a negative Nancy quite a bit in this video and everything, but sometimes the things we love most are the things that we are the most critical about. I love Anno 1800. I love the Anno series. Obviously, Anno 1800 is what propelled my channel to where we're at today, close to 40,000 subscribers. So the game itself has been great for me for both a content creation standpoint and just as a great game to play. Now, obviously, I don't play that much anymore. I've played it to death. I've got several thousand hours in the game, and there's just not a whole lot left that I want to do with the game. I do play it sometimes just for you guys and everything, but I have moved on to other games. But there's still so many new people finding the game to this day and falling in love with it. I get several hundred new subscribers every day. I get at least 20 or 30 new people on my Discord every day coming in, asking questions, wanting to learn about the game and everything. And it's still fun to teach people about this game and to teach people how to play Anno 1800. It really was the pinnacle of 20 some odd years of development and ideas and mechanics all coming together in a great package. Now, unfortunately, it was not a perfect package because, like I said, there were things I didn't really like about it with the DLCs and some of the patches and bugs and stuff like that, but every game has its problems. I can't really give an example of a perfect game that has no issues whatsoever. But overall, I think Anno 1800 did a really good job of reaching out to the masses and presenting itself as a fun, engaging game to play. And I still recommend it to people looking for city building games to this day. And I would still recommend it to someone who is looking for a city builder to play and looking for a resource management type game to play. It is a perfect melding of those two genres, that city builder and that resource management. So if you made it this far, thank you so much for listening to my ramblings and stuff about Anno 1800 and my thoughts on the game. Now that we're about a year past the announcement that development was over and everything else. So I hope you enjoyed this video and everything. If you did, let me know down below in the comments your thoughts on it all. And I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Until then, guys, take care.